Hi, my name is Erin Wade, and I am the founder of Homeroom, a mac and cheese restaurant in Oakland, California. Woo! I'm here today because we're achieving some pretty extraordinary results by using some unconventional methods. And what do I mean by extraordinary results? Well, for one, Homeroom's revenue per square foot is some of the highest you'll find in the industry. Our retention is some of the highest you'll find in any industry. And our mac and cheese, I know I'm biased, but it's the best in the world. So in addition, despite being one small restaurant in Oakland, California, we are consistently recognized in national media for all the innovation that we're creating in our workplace. So before I get into how we're doing this, I want to talk a little bit about the why. So my path to mac and cheese superstardom began in a very unlikely place, a boring law office. Now, I had worked as a line cook in restaurants for years, and I just got fed up with the low pay and the poor working conditions, so I decided to leave it all behind and pursue this much more staid, boring, lucrative career as a lawyer. But the problem was that I hated it. And I missed everything about restaurants except what it felt like to work in them. So I started wondering, if I could start my own restaurant, could I maybe create the kind of culture that I had wanted to experience as a young cook, but never had? And to be honest, the legal profession was not much more inspiring in terms of a workplace environment. So, I decided in 2011 to take the leap and to open Homeroom. And armed with my dad's mac and cheese recipe, I opened this temple to cheesy carbs. And over the next decade, I devoted my life to really figuring out how to make good on that original question of how do you create a great place to work. And so that's what I'm here to talk about today. Now, the best story that I know to explain exactly what we were doing at Homeroom is actually not by talking about food or cooking or even restaurants, but it's a story about my favorite sport, surfing. So if you don't know anything about surfing, the rules are simple. When a wave comes, there's a group of people out at the break. The first person to get on the wave gets it all to themselves. So that means in this picture where you see me, there's like a group of really disappointed people off in the background somewhere that didn't get on this one. And it makes the sport incredibly aggressive, competitive, and winner-take-all. It is also, to this day, extremely male-dominated. And if you go to local beaches, locals are very protective of their local break, and it's very hierarchical to try to sort of work your way up to get better waves and more respect. Now, there's nothing wrong with the way that surfing has been practiced for hundreds of years, but this one day, I went to a beach in a remote spot in Northern California, and when I arrived, something surprising happened. Usually it's me and a bunch of dudes, but on this day, there was only women in the water. And none of us knew each other, but without saying a word, it was as though hundreds of years of surfing tradition was turned on its head. Instead of competing for the waves, we started collaborating on how to get the most possible people on the most possible waves. We took turns, we cheered each other on. It was one of the most fulfilling and joyful days I have ever had. Now, when I went to work the next day, I realized that that moment on that surf break was what I, as a female leader, had actually been doing at Homeroom, but had been really struggling to articulate. Oh, oops, sorry guys. Forgot to move through my slides. I was so excited about surfing. So here's the sort of historical norms of the sport. And here's what it was like that day on that female lineup. So I'm here today to talk about, if you get as excited as I do about that surfing story, how do you create that kind of culture in your restaurant? And I found that there are 3 tricks. You have to define it, discuss it, and protect it. So let's start with defining it. So the truth is that innovative, collaborative environments, they generally don't happen on their own. If this is your goal, you have to say what it is. And so how we defined it at Homeroom is we called this concept collective success. And what we meant by that is that we would look at every decision we were going to make, whether it was to stay open an hour later or to open a new location. And the goal was to maximize the benefit to the team, to our customers, and to our community. And now, maybe that doesn't sound that exciting to you, but the truth is that very few companies in any field are run that way. So if you think about something like Amazon, they're known as having incredible customer service. They are providing incredible profits for their shareholders, but they're also known as a terrible place to work, right? And then restaurants, we have sort of this opposite fail mode where we're very obsessed with the guest experience. Occasionally, we're also really into the team experience. But profits are often really, really lacking, right? So this value of collective success was very meaningful to us. And we built it into absolutely everything that we would do. So you can't just say what it is. We would hire for it. We would train for this value. We would include it in our performance evaluations, like, are people really living this? And we would require it for promotions. You had to really show that this was something that you were dedicated to if you ever wanted to be a leader. Now, in terms of the impact that this kind of thing has on an organization, I'd love to share a little story, which is a number of years ago, we included a service charge on our menu. And we had some language saying that if you wanted to leave your server an extra tip, you could leave like an extra 5 or 10%, but it wasn't necessary. And so there were some disgruntled servers who came into my office one day. They're like, hey, we want to get rid of that language on the menu because it's reducing our tips. And I mean, it was. The whole purpose it was on the menu was to reduce their tips. So anyway, so we started a conversation. And I was like, all right, well, I need you to walk me through, how do we think about this with collective success? And so we walked through. They were like, well, hey, for the team, your servers are going to be so much happier because we're going to make so much more money. But then we talked about the kitchen. And they're like, oh, well, I guess, the kitchen does already make less than we do, and, that would increase our pay disparity. So they realized it was a bit of a net neutral when you thought about the team. And then we talked about the customers and realized that they were going to be paying more for, the same experience. So probably not the best for them. And when you add a greater pay disparity coupled with customers paying more for the same experience, it was pretty hard to imagine that this was going to be a sustainably profitable decision for the business. And so those same folks who walked into my office asking for a raise, whatever this language should be taken off the menu, walked out of the office basically talking themselves out of it. And why I think this is an interesting story is that if you think about most restaurants or most businesses, those folks would have come into a leader or manager's office, they would have asked for something, that person would have said no, they would have left, they would have been disgruntled, maybe they'd leave, maybe they'd go to another place with higher pay, but not a single person left. And in fact, they felt pretty good leaving the office. They understood why it happened. They had actually pretty much made the decision themselves. And so when you look at what happens in aggregate with this was really a key to our retention metrics, which were 10x the industry average. So the average tenure at Homeroom is 2.5 years. The average tenure in the industry, in the United States anyway, is a depressing less than 90 days. And it's because it feels good, it feels meaningful to be a part of something that is bigger than yourself.